So before I hand over to Gihan to introduce the speaker today, a small announcement for the students. Now, as I posted in the your WhatsApp messages, so there the PEMSA UK has awarded the research fellowship award for the students. So the closing date is on the 31st of this month. So I strongly recommend the students to apply for that. So it carries now you'll be given a certificate as well as I think £250. It's a big money, isn't it, Gihan? Yeah. So you can apply for
Yes,
that.
definitely too.
Yeah. So you have only 2 weeks till the closing date. So with that note, let me invite Gihan to introduce the speaker today, Dr. Jagat Premadas. Over to you, Gihan.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Jagat Premadasa. He's a consultant obstetrician and gynecologist at Anuradhapura Teaching Hospital. He's a board certified consultant obstetrician and gynecologist for the past 14 years, and he's a fellow of Sri Lanka College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. He's a Peradeniya alumnus, and he also serves as a visiting lecturer to the Rajarata Medical Faculty. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jagat Premadasa. Over to you, Dr. Jagat.
Thank you, Gihan. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Right. Now, first of all, I have to thank the PEMSA for inviting me to deliver this lecture on heart disease in pregnancy. So, heart disease in pregnancy, in fact, heart disease in pregnancy is very challenging for obstetricians. Of course, when you are managing patients with heart disease, we have to liaise with we have to manage it in a sort of a multidisciplinary team approach. Heart disease in pregnancy is it's a large topic, and it's within one lecture it's very hard to cover the entire topic, but I would try to touch upon main sort of presentations in pregnancy, actually for the benefit of the medical students. Right, can I is my lecture shared now, the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see the topic slide.
All right, okay. Right. When you take incidence of heart disease in pregnancy, it varies between 0.5 to 4% globally. So depending on the country where you see the diseases, averagely you can put it up to 1%. The incidence of heart disease in pregnancy is on the rise. The reason is, hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Right, okay. Okay, right. The incidence of heart disease in pregnancy varies from 0.1 to 4%. Averagely, it's about 1%, depending on where you see the incidence. And the pregnancy with heart disease is on the rise in the world. That is due to the advancement of medical and surgical therapy on the patients with heart disease. And so that the maternal mortality is also in the rise, because heart disease, patients with heart disease are becoming pregnant, and then obviously the mortality has to rise. The same way, the congenital heart disease, the patients with congenital heart disease during pregnancy is also increasing, because earlier the patients with congenital heart disease died very early, young age, maybe during the period of infancy, they died, but now more and more with more and more surgical approach, they survive to the childbearing age, so that you will see more and more patients with congenital heart diseases. In developed countries, maternal mortality rate increased due to heart disease. That is because it's a relative increase, because there are other reasons of heart disease, other reasons of maternal mortality has come down, so that the heart disease is surviving, so that the mortality rate has increased in developed countries. In developing countries, still rheumatic heart disease Still, rheumatic heart disease is the number one cause of heart disease in pregnancy. Even in Sri Lanka, still our rheumatic heart disease, the incidence of rheumatic fever and heart disease is declining, but still that serves the main cause of heart disease in pregnancy yet. This graph, of course, I have extracted from Ministry of Health annual bulletin in 2018. This depicts the highest leading causes of maternal mortality in Sri Lanka. In 2018, the maternal mortality rate was 32 per 100,000 live births. Out of these causes, obstetric hemorrhage is the leading cause of maternal death. Then respiratory disease and heart disease have taken the second place. So you have to imagine the place of heart disease in pregnancy. So still we are looking at around 30s in the case of maternal mortality rate. We haven't been able to bring it down below the 30s. One of the reasons is that heart disease are prevalent in this country, and the management, of course, is suboptimal. Why the heart diseases are at risk in pregnancy is because in pregnancy the maternal body undergoes various changes, physiological as well as anatomical changes. If you take the physiological changes which are relevant to cardiovascular system, the blood volume increases in pregnancy, the plasma volume increases by about 40%, and then cardiac output will increase from about 40 to 50%. The heart rate will rise about 10 to 15%. Mean arterial pressure will rise about 5%. Stroke volume will increase up to about 30%. And at the same time, vascular resistance will reduce due to the effect of hormones, and pulmonary vascular resistance also reduces by about 30 to 40% in pregnancy. All these changes are brought about by the hormonal changes which are related to the placenta. Secretes a lot of hormones and chemical mediators. As a result, all these physiological changes and anatomical changes take place. In pregnancy, of course, these changes start to happen from as early as 6 weeks of pregnancy, and the changes will become maximum by about 30 to 32 weeks. And especially in labor, there will be a lot of hemodynamical changes occurring in pregnancy, especially in labor, in the first and second stage of labor and postpartum period and early puerperal period. Fluid shifts occur so that the cardiac output will increase, and intravascular volume will increase, and that will have a repercussion on the cardiac homeostasis. Uh, the blood volume, what happens in pregnancy is that it keeps on increasing throughout the pregnancy, and it will say total blood volume, if you look at this, will come up to about highest point around 28 weeks to 30 weeks. Plasma volume also increases up to about 28 to 30 weeks. It's a steady rise, but red blood cell volume does not increase as much as the fluid volume. So the hematocrit will be a little lower than expected. What happens to the blood pressure during pregnancy? If you look at the systolic blood pressure, blood pressure tends to reduce due to the reduction of peripheral vascular resistance in pregnancy. Now this, if you take this graph, it is the x-axis is marked in lunar months, and so if you look at these changes, you can see the lowest blood pressure is coming down towards the second trimester. Around 20 to 24 weeks it will be quite lower, and when it comes to the time of delivery, blood pressure goes up, and then by about postpartum day 4 it will try to come back to the normal pressure levels. The heart rate also increases in pregnancy. It can go up to about 10 to 15%, so that you will see a heartbeat can increase by 10 to 20 beats per minute, and it also increases the same way. Gradually it increases by about 30 weeks, 32 weeks, heart rate will be maximum, and then it will come down, and at the time of delivery, of course, the heart rate goes up. It's you have a lot of sympathetic work going on around during the labor process, and it will come back to normal by about 5 to 6 days postpartum. What happens to the cardiac output? Cardiac output will increase by about 50% during the pregnancy, and also it varies in various circumstances. For example, it varies maximally during labor and postpartum period. In labor, in the first stage, cardiac output will increase by about 15%. In the second stage, it can go up to about 50% rise in the cardiac output, and it will further increase in the third stage of labor. The uterus undergoes contraction after the delivery of the placenta, and this whole blood in the circulate in the uterus will be released back to the circulation. So that is called autotransfusion. And at the same time, effect of the gravid uterus on the inferior vena cava also released, so that the venous return will also increase. So the cardiac output depends on the venous return and end-diastolic volume, so that the cardiac output will increase further in the third stage of labor. And also the sympathetic activity in labor, pain and anxiety also will shoot up the cardiac output. So totally all these changes are, of course, giving a lot of pressure to the heart. So in a patient who's having low cardiac reserve tend to have cardiac failure in pregnancy. That is the reason. In pregnancy, there are certain symptoms and signs actually which mimic heart diseases. So it's very difficult. These symptoms are overlapping. You know, in pregnancy, you will see symptoms like breathlessness. It is very common. The mothers are coming and telling you that they are short of breath, right? And weakness, edema is very common. Usually, you see edema happening around 28 onwards, but sometimes some women will have edema, leg edema, ankle edema early. Syncopal attacks are very common in pregnancy. You know, what happens is when they're standing up for a long time due to orthostatic hypertension, they tend to have syncopal attack. It's a very, very common symptom of pregnancy. Tachycardia. Tachycardia is also very common. Sometimes they will have palpitations also in pregnancy. And loud first heart sound. It is very, very common. When you auscultate the heart of a mother, you will hear how loud first heart sound. And splitting of the heart sound you will have heard when you are examining a pregnant mother. That is very common. And sometimes you will hear floor murmurs, systolic floor murmurs, and on the sternal edge you hear bruise of the breast and internal mammary bruit. And sometimes you will hear third heart sound, which is also a physiological heart sound. And apex beat, when you take apex beat, you will see that the apex beat is shifted to the left, which is also a sign of heart disease. In valvular heart disease, you will see a shift of apex beat. When you take symptoms of heart disease, again you will see, you will experience shortness of breath. And in heart disease, what happens is shortness of breath is progressive, and you will see orthopnea, nocturnal dyspnea, nocturnal cough, and syncopal attacks, chest pain, and hemoptysis. And then when you are examining a patient with heart disease, you have to look for cyanosis, clubbing of fingers in chronic cyanotic heart disease, persistently elevated distended neck veins, systolic murmurs, diastolic murmurs. When you hear diastolic murmur, it's very significant. And cardiomegaly and arrhythmias, persistent arrhythmias, because sometimes in pregnancy also you can have ectopic beats, which is of course taken as normal in pregnancy. Ventricular ectopic beats you can have even in normal pregnant women. If you hear a second heart sound, which is a fixed heart sound, that is pathological. Then when you measure the pulmonary vascular pressure, you will see increased vascular pressure in heart disease. So what are the investigations you do in pregnancy? Chest X-ray, of course, you don't tend to do chest X-rays in pregnancy, but when it is relevant, you will have to take chest X-rays. In normal pregnant women, you will see, if you look at this, this is a normal. On the left, you have a chest X-ray of a normal pregnant woman. Heart is higher size of the heart is increased. You know, in pregnancy, the heart can increase up to about 30%. That is also physiological. And due to the shift of the diaphragm and the changes, anatomical changes of the chest, again you will see the heart might look as hypertrophy, left ventricular hypertrophy in chest X-ray, but it is not. Actually, this change you will see because of the changes of the anatomical changes of the pregnancy. ECG, if you take an ECG in a normal pregnant mother, you can see various changes. You can see left axis deviation is common, and sometimes you can see small Q waves in AVF leads, and T inversions are very common in V1 to V3 leads. Sometimes even we can see in V5 leads, may be normal in a pregnant woman. And as I earlier said, you can see ectopic beats. Ventricular ectopics are very common in pregnancy. Sometimes atrial ectopics you can see. They may not be pathological. Holter monitoring, you may have to do Holter monitoring in patients who are having symptoms like palpitations, and in patients who have had previous paroxysmal or persistent documented arrhythmias, then you will have to do Holter monitoring in pregnancy. And you may come across patients who are carrying these investigations in their hand very commonly. And palpitations are very common in pregnancy. They may be pathological, or most of them are non-pathological, but still you can't neglect them. So then you will have to do Holter monitoring and see whether they are pathological. 2D echo is safe in pregnancy, and this is one of the mostly done investigations in pregnant women with heart disease. If you hear a murmur, of course you can't neglect that. Even if it's a systolic murmur, still you may have to refer the patient to the cardiologist for echocardiography. Transesophageal echo is the best way to evaluate heart diseases, but in pregnancy you will have to avoid doing TOEs, because in pregnancy you can have vomiting and there is a risk of aspiration. But you can do TOEs after the baby is delivered. That is what the cardiologists recommend. And electrophysiological and angiography, sometimes you will have to do, and most of the time you tend to avoid these investigations in pregnancy because of the risk of radiation, but still if it is necessary, then you will have to do these investigations. What is the effect of radiation on the fetus? The effect depends on the dose of radiation and the gestational age. If it is possible, you will have to avoid radiation during the first trimester, because that is the time where you have complete organogenesis of the fetus. By about 12 weeks, from 8 to 12 weeks, the organogenesis occurs. By about 12 weeks, so it will be complete. So after the 12 weeks, you can, if you really want, you can do some tests. But in most of the investigations, it has been seen that the amount of radiation that needs to cause changes in the fetus is more than 50 milligauss, right? So if you subject a fetus to a radiation more than 50 milligauss, there is a possibility of fetal malformation and IUGR, and disability of intellectual disability and growth restriction, and miscarriages. But if you take most of the investigations that we do using using X-rays, the exposure is minimal. If you take chest X-rays, fetal exposure is even less than 1 milligrams. Maternal exposure is even maternal exposure is less than 1 milligrams. If you take CT chest, the fetal exposure is 0.3 milligrams. Maternal is 7 milligrams. Coronary angiography, it's about 1.5 milligrams the fetal exposure, and the maternal exposure is about 7 milligrams, and PCI is about 3 milligrams, and maternal exposure is 15 milligrams. So as I earlier said, if it is more than 50 milligrams only, it can affect the fetus. But still, you tend to delay these investigations until you pass 12 weeks, unless it is mandatory. And then again, you do this test with pelvic shield, so that the risk of exposure is very minimal. CT imaging in pregnancy in heart disease, sometimes you might have to do this imaging, especially when you suspect pulmonary embolism. If you need to make the diagnosis, if you can't make a clinical diagnosis, if you want to confirm the diagnosis, then you will have to do CTPA. Then irrespective of the gestation, then you will have to do CTPA to diagnose this condition. MRI is a very safe investigation in pregnancy, and it is useful in diagnosing complex heart diseases and aortic pathology. So if it is indicated, you can go ahead and do MRI rather than doing CTs. Generally, outcome and the safety of the pregnancy are related to presence and severity of pulmonary hypertension, presence of cyanosis, and the hemodynamic significance of the lesion of the heart, and the functional class of the patient. Functional class of the patient is measured with New York Heart Association classification. It is like this. NYHA, according to the NYHA classification, class 1 is where you have you can do ordinary physical activity which does not cause undue fatigue, palpitations, dyspnea, and no angina. In class 2, you can do ordinary physical activity, but it does cause undue fatigue and palpitations, dyspnea, and no angina. In class 3, even with less than ordinary physical activity, it will cause undue fatigue, palpitation, dyspnea, and angina. In class 4, even at rest, it will cause fatigue, palpitation, dyspnea, and angina. So this classification is very important in assessing the patients with heart disease in pregnancy. You can see it's a functional classification, so that one thing is, when you see a patient, at first you can assess this patient, and as you monitor the patient, you can see whether this patient is shifting from one class to the other class, and that tells you that the patient's condition is getting worse. Usually good outcome of patients with heart disease has been seen in patients with previously asymptomatic heart disease, when the NYHA classification is less than 2, and most of the patients who are coming in pregnancy with heart disease belong to NYHA classification 1 or 2. 85% of maternal deaths are related to NYHA class 3 or 4. And adverse outcome has been associated with previous cardiac events, say previous arrhythmias, previous say myocardial infarction, previous cardiac failure. Then the outcome is you can anticipate an adverse outcome. When the NYHA classification is beyond 2 is another indicator of adverse outcome. Cyanosis, and when the ejection fraction is less than 40, and if there is left heart obstruction, that is the mitral valve area is less than 2 square meter or aortic valve area is less than 1.5 square meter, then the outcome may be poor. What are the effects of cyanosis? When the oxygen saturation is less than 80 to 85%, there's a risk of intrauterine growth retardation. There's a risk of fetal loss, and the live birth rate is less than even 20% when there is cyanosis. There's a risk of thromboembolism. Why? Because cyanosis causes reactive polycythemia, and that will lead into formation thrombi, and that can lead into thromboembolism. How do you manage a patient with heart disease in pregnancy? Pregnancy, I mean, the pre-pregnancy, that is preconceptionally, how do you manage this patient? Pregnancy has to be a planned event. You can't haphazardly become pregnant if you have a heart disease. This patient has to be evaluated and properly counseled. You have to evaluate previous cardiac events, complications, arrhythmias. You have to assess the functional classification of the patient, and until the patient is suitable to become pregnant, you have to offer the patient with a suitable contraceptive method. And the patient's medical management should be optimal for a pregnancy. If she is on drugs which are teratogenic for the fetus, then you will have to change the drugs if possible. If she is anemic, you have to correct anemia before becoming pregnant. If she needs cardiac surgery, then you have to wait until this cardiac surgery is done. For example, if it's a septal defect, then you will have to counsel the patient that she has to get this corrected, and then after that only she has to become pregnant. So until then you have to give a very effective contraceptive method. Genetic counseling is very important because some of the heart diseases are genetically carried forward, so that if the mother or father is affected, the babies also can get affected. For example, atrioventricular septal defects, if the mother has, then the fetus has a risk of transmitting to the fetus is about 11%. If the father has got atrioventricular septal defect, risk is 4.3%. Aortic stenosis, 8% if the mother has. If the father has, about 4% risk. Coarctation of aorta, mother has a 6% risk. If the father has got 3% risk to the progeny. Atrial septal defects, if the mother has got the defect 6%, father has, then it's 3.5%. Likewise, it will go on, and the total risk of mother giving to the baby is 5.8%. The father giving to the baby is 3.1%. So this genetic counseling is important, because sometimes patients will come and ask you that my father, I am having this condition. What is the possibility that my baby will have the same condition? Then you will have to know what are the conditions which can be passed on to the next generation, and what is the risk. Right. Antenatal management should be aimed at monitoring the maternal and fetal well-being, and it is always multidisciplinary team approach. Mother should be routinely questioned and examined for signs and symptoms of cardiac failure. Each and every visit you have to see these features of cardiac failure. As I earlier said, you have to assess the functional classification of NIHA functional classification. Simple questions that you can ask are that whether you are having shortness of breath, and when do you have the shortness of breath? When you are relaxing, do you have shortness of breath? Or when you are walking, you are having a shortness of breath? And how far can you walk without having short of breath? Or when you're climbing up a staircase, do you get shortness of breath? Likewise, you can assess the severity of the shortness of breath, and each and every clinic visit you can do the same thing, and then you can get an idea about the worsening of the condition. Vital signs have to be always monitored. Weight gain is very important. If the mother is getting increase in the weight suddenly, that is it's very significant, because that patient can go into cardiac failure. Sudden weight gain may be due to fluid retention. So that is a very, very important point. Assessment of the fetus during antenatal period is important. During the first trimester, you can detect certain cardiac abnormalities. The sensitivity of detecting cardiac abnormalities in the first trimester is very higher than the specificity. That is, if you see a lesion, you can 99% you can say that the baby's got a lesion. But if you don't see a lesion, the specificity is about 85%. That means you can't. Hope that you hear me, right? Fetus anomaly scans should be done from 18 to 22 weeks. Around that time, you can see the cardiac anomalies. And then you have to see if there is any intrauterine gradation. Doppler studies have to be done for fetal surveillance. And during the antenatal period, you have to discuss the further fertility wishes, and you have to discuss methods of contraception, and you have to plan as to what to do. If she is happy with permanent sterilization, then you will have to organize that. It's a contraceptive method, and so it is better for you to discuss it earlier than waiting until she delivers, because after the delivery she can't discuss these things. She is in stress with the baby. So it is very, very important to discuss these things during the antenatal period. What are the indications for admission? Admissions, you have to admit the patients electively, as well as you have to admit patient urgently. Electively, you will have to admit in these situations like if the patient is having functional class of 1, then you will have to admit the patient about 2 weeks before the expected date of delivery. If class is it should be 1 to 2, this says only 1, but it should be 1 to 2. 1 to 2, then you will have to admit around 8 to 30 weeks, and then you will have to assess the patient, and sometimes you will have to keep the patient in the ward depending on the patient's clinical setup. If the patient is close by and a reliable patient, probably you will be able to discharge the patient, and you will have to closely monitor the patient. Probably you will have to see the patients every 2 weeks. Obstetrician will have to see the patients close very frequently. In the case of NYHA classification 3 and 4 patients, irrespective of the gestation, you will have to admit the patient as soon as you come across this patient, because they are vulnerable for cardiac failure, and so to prevent any maternal death, you will have to admit these patients early as possible. And sometimes you will have to admit these patients to change their anticoagulant drugs. If they are on oral anticoagulants, change these patients and start on enoxaparin. Till about 12 weeks you'll have to continue enoxaparin, and then after 12 weeks you can, if you want, you can continue with oral anticoagulants, or you can continue with the low molecular weight heparin if the condition permits. And around 36 weeks again you will have to put them back onto heparin. If the patient goes into labor, it's very hard to control bleeding if she's on warfarin, but if she's on heparin, bleeding cannot be controlled easily. When the functional grade is deteriorating, then you will have to admit the patient urgently. When there are complications like fever, persistent cough, basal Krebs, tachyarrhythmias, when the JVP is elevated more than 2 centimeters, anemia, pregnancy-induced hypertension, abnormal weight gain, and if there is any other medical disorder, then you will have to probably admit the patient urgently. Because if you have these conditions, then patient can deteriorate fast. Labor and delivery, it is of course a multidisciplinary team approach. You have to involve obstetrician, cardiologist, anesthesiologist, intensivist, neonatologist, and probably the trained nurses and midwives into the management of labor and delivery. When you talk about the timing of delivery, you have to wait the spontaneous onset of labor. That is the preferred way of waiting for the delivery. But especially when the patients are having no cardiac functions, but times you will have to induce earlier. especially when the patient's condition is getting deteriorated, you may tend to induce early or may elect to deliver by cesarean section. Timing of delivery may depend on the cardiac status, the cervix, and the fetal well-being and lung maturity of the fetus. When there is only mild unrepaired congenital heart disease or who has undergone repair with minimal residual effects, the delivery and labor is same as for a normal patient. So you don't have to change. You can anticipate normal spontaneous onset of labor and normal delivery. Induction of labor, if it is uncomplicated, you can induce with ARM and oxytocin if the Bishop's score is favorable, then 7. If it is unfavorable, you can still induce with dinoprostatone or bisoprolol. Foley catheter is preferable in patients with cyanosis. Always vaginal delivery is preferred. Why vaginal delivery is preferred is because if you take cesarean section is involved with high risk of infection, and the patient cannot be mobilized early, and there's a risk of hemorrhage, and there's a risk of anesthesia. So vaginal delivery is preferred. Can you all hear me? Cesarean delivery should be considered in the case of patients who are on oral anticoagulation, because when they are on oral anticoagulation, you will have to put them onto heparin. For example, patients who are on prosthetic heart valves, you have to put them on oral anticoagulants, and then when you put them on heparin, you have to put them on heparin only for a shorter period. Otherwise, they will the prosthetic valve can get damaged. The other thing is easily formed thrombi on the valves. So you will have to do an elective cesarean section on these patients. The patient is in preterm labor, sometimes you will have to consider cesarean delivery. In patients with Marfan syndrome, when the aorta is dilated more than 45 millimeters, the diameter, if it is more than 45 millimeters, then you will have to do. Sorry, I again lost the connection. Hope you all can hear me. Right, I think it's maybe because of the bad weather here, losing connection time to time. So cesarean section has to be considered in patients like severe aortic stenosis and pulmonary hypertension. Of course, there is no other way than going in for cesarean section. In labor, hemodynamic monitoring is very important. Ideally, the patients with heart disease, you have to deliver the baby, let the patient go into labor in a HDU setup or ICU, and if you have cardiac monitor, of course, then you can monitor the blood pressure, heart rate, and ECG, and oxygen saturation. These things, of course, you have to monitor very regularly. Analgesia is a very important aspect of in labor, patients in labor. Regional anesthesia is very important, very useful. What we do is we give epidural analgesia, and why is it important is because it will reduce pain of the mother. When you don't have pain, the sympathetic activity is less, so that heart rate will come down, the pressure will also come down. And once you have epidural block, the mother will not have urge to push. When you have urge to push, when you are doing Valsalva maneuver, then the heart rate and the blood pressure increases. And easily you can, if the patient needs a cesarean section, you can easily do cesarean section because she is already having epidural analgesia, and you have to just top up the epidural. That's all you need. When you are giving regional anesthesia, you have to be cautious because it can drop blood pressure, it can cause hypotension, and sometimes that can cause cardiac failure. When the patient is in labor, the patient has to be put on lateral position, lying down lateral position. Fluid balance has to be meticulously controlled. When you are giving oxytocin, you have to use smaller volumes. If you use syringe pumps or delivery pumps, then you can minimize the dose of volume that you give the mother, so that the plasma volume will not expand. So if the volume is higher, that can precipitate cardiac failure and pulmonary. In labor, you have to avoid straining, so that's why I give epidural anesthesia. Second stage of labor, you have to perform instrumental delivery. That is to avoid the straining, so that vacuum, when you give epidural anesthesia, the mother will not have pain, she will not have urge to push, but the contractions will continue. To apply instruments, you will have to have effective contractions, so the contractions are there, so that you can perform instrumental delivery. So that when you do instrumental delivery, the strain on the heart will be less. Routine antibiotic prophylaxis is not recommended nowadays, so that you don't have to give routine antibiotic prophylaxis on except in exceptional cases. So you don't have to give it routinely. Continuous CTG monitoring is recommended during labor, but in Sri Lankan setup we don't have this facility, but if you have this facility, of course that is very useful and very important for the surveillance of the fetus. How do you give antibiotic prophylaxis for subacute endocarditis? And as I said, for all the patients, it is indicated only for the patients who has at risk of infection, or if they have got severe lesions, severe rheumatic lesions, or say prosthetic valves. What you give is ampicillin. You can give 2 grams IV or IM, plus gentamicin 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight, maximum about 120, and you can repeat after 6 hours later. Then if she is allergic to penicillin, you can use vancomycin or clindamycin plus gentamicin instead of ampicillin. During the postpartum period, oxytocin you can administer slow infusion. You can't give boluses, and you have to avoid ergometrin. Prostaglandin F2 alpha, which is called carboprost, and this is sometimes useful in the case of postpartum hemorrhage. But when you're using carboprost, you have to be careful because it can increase the pulmonary arterial pressure. So if there is pulmonary hypertension, you may not be able to use carboprost. Thromboembolic prophylaxis, you have to give graded stockings, low molecular weight heparin, a prophylactic dose, and you have, if possible, you will have to mobilize the patient early, depending on the functional class of the patient. Sometimes you might not be able to mobilize, then you will have to give proper care on bed rest patients. Then again, during the first 24 to 74 hours is critical, where you have to monitor carefully. And why? Because during that time the cardiac output will increase due to auto transfusion. You know, as I said earlier, after delivery of the placenta, blood in the uterus will be circulated back to the main circulation, and edema fluid will be back to the circulation, and inferior vena cava, pressure on the inferior vena cava is released, so that a lot of blood fluid will be shifted back to the blood volume, and blood volume will increase, so that the venous return will increase and the cardiac output will increase. And if the heart is weak, then it can undergo heart failure. Breastfeeding, you must try to give breastfeeding. If it is possible, you have to encourage breastfeeding, but in cases of WHO 3 and 4 and peripartum cardiomyopathy patients, you have to avoid breastfeeding, because of the anxiety of breastfeeding, it can precipitate cardiac failure in this patient. In WHO class 1, I am coming to this WHO class 1 categories later. These patients, you can use progesterone only pills, intradermal implants, LNG IUS, emergency contraceptive pills as methods of contraception. Mirena or LNG IUS much favored than copper IUD, because LNG IUS, one thing is it's more effective than copper IUD. Secondly, it causes less bleeding and pain than copper IUD. So it is very well accepted that LNG IUD is better than copper IUD, so it is much preferred in these patients. IM Depo-Provera should be avoided in patients with cardiac failure, because it can cause fluid retention. If the patient is going into permanent sterilization, then you have to offer that permanent sterilization. Some patients may not be able to undergo permanent sterilization because of the risk of anesthesia. In such patients, you can do hysteroscopic tubal occlusion, what you call Essure. You can do it as office procedure. You don't need anesthesia for this procedure. Otherwise, you can counsel the couple for vasectomy. As far as the management is concerned, these heart conditions are classified into WHO classification according to the cardiac risk principles. If you look at these risks, there are four classes. Class number 1 is when there is no detectable increased risk of maternal mortality and no or mild increase in morbidity. These patients are fall into risk category 1. Risk category 2, when there is a small increase in risk of maternal mortality or moderate increase in morbidity. There is a small increase risk of maternal mortality or moderate increase in morbidity. These patients will fall into WHO class 2. When there is a significantly increased risk of maternal mortality or severe morbidity, when they need expert counseling. If the pregnancy is decided upon in this patient, intensive specialist cardiac and obstetric monitoring is needed throughout the pregnancy, childbirth and the puerperium. So this function, the WHO classification 3 group is highly risk mothers. Sometimes these patients can go into pregnancy, and if they become pregnant and if they wish to become pregnant, you have to monitor them very closely. Then class 4 patients are the ones who are extremely high risk of maternal mortality or severe morbidity. Pregnancy is contraindicated in this category. If pregnancy occurs, termination should be discussed in these patients. If the pregnancy continues, if they say they want to continue the pregnancy irrespective of the risk, so then the patient have to be monitored very, very closely, and the care should be done in a tertiary care hospital where all the facilities are available, and these patients have to be counseled very well before the pregnancy, the risk to the mother, and if she becomes pregnant, there is a high chance of maternal death. Then we'll see what are these cases which fall into this classification. WHO 1, the group, if you take, these are the conditions: uncomplicated small or mild pulmonary stenosis, patent ductus arteriosus, mitral valve prolapse. These are minor heart conditions, and if there is a successfully repaired simple lesion, for example atrial or ventricular septal defect, patent ductus arteriosus, or anomalous pulmonary venous drainage, or if there is an atrial or ventricular ectopic beats which are isolated. So these conditions fall into WHO category 1, class 1. If these patients become pregnant, their follow-up is almost like a normal patient. They have to have 1 or 2 cardiology visits per pregnancy. That is more than enough. So they can go like normal patient, and even labor is not very much needed to be monitored. If you take risk group 2, what are the cases? What are the conditions? Unoperated atrial atrial or ventricular septal defects which are otherwise uncomplicated. Repaired TOF, tetralogy of Fallot's, and most arrhythmias. These will fall into WHO class 2. These patients will need cardiology review every trimester. Right, so the cardiologist will have to see every trimester these patients. Probably they will do echocardiography and see the progress of the disease. Right. Then there's a group which fall into WHO risk group 2 to 3. So it depends on the individual, right? What are the conditions? Mild left ventricular impairment. Then hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Then valvular heart diseases which are not considered class 1 or 4. So in between. Then Marfan syndrome without aortic dilatation. If the aortic dilatation is less than 45 millimeters in aortic disease associated with bicuspid aortic valve. Bicuspid aortic valve you can see in aortic stenosis, of course. Other cases are repaired coarctation aorta. So these patients will fall into WHO 2 to 3 in between category. These patients will need monthly or bi-monthly review by the cardiologists and the obstetricians. They are bit of a high risk category. Who fall into WHO 3 category? Mechanical valves. So the valve is repaired, but they have a mechanical valve, so they are on anticoagulation. Systemic right ventricle, Fontan circulation, cyanotic heart disease which are unrepaired. Other complex congenital heart diseases. When the aortic dilatation is between 40 to 45 millimeters in Marfan syndrome. Previous group less than 45, now this is between 40 to 45. When the aortic dilatation is 40 to 45 to 15 millimeters in aortic disease associated with bicuspid valve. Right. These patients will need monthly or bi-monthly review by cardiologist or obstetrician again. Who fall into the WHO 4 risk category? In these patients, the pregnancy is contraindicated. Pulmonary arterial hypertension of any type. Severe systemic ventricular dysfunction, if the ejection fraction is less than 30%. NYHA classification 3 to 4, if they fall into that functional class. Or previous peripartum cardiomyopathy with any residual impairment of left ventricular function. So they have had previous peripartum cardiomyopathy, but they haven't come back to normal after the delivery. So they have some residual impairment. Severe mitral stenosis with severe symptomatic aortic stenosis. Severe mitral stenosis or severe symptomatic aortic stenosis. Marfan syndrome with aorta dilated more than 45 millimeters. Aortic dilatation more than 50 millimeters in aortic disease associated with bicuspid aortic valve. Right. Severe coarctation of aorta. If they continue to, if they even after proper counseling, when you say that pregnancy is contraindicated, sometimes they might still want to undergo pregnancy. If they are already pregnant, they might not give the consent for termination, so that you will have to see these patients very frequently, at least monthly or twice a month. They have to be seen by the cardiologist and the obstetrician. Let's move on to the congenital heart diseases. Pulmonary hypertension. It is classified as WHO 3 and 4 risk group. What are the causes of pulmonary hypertension? There are multiple causes of pulmonary hypertension. It may be related to the left heart disease. It may be related to lung disease or hypoxia, or it may be related to chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension, or it may be related to any unclear cause or multifactorial mechanisms, or it may be idiopathic, and sometimes it may be associated with congenital heart disease. So there are multiple causes of pulmonary hypertension. When the mean arterial pressure is more than 25 millimeters mercury at rest, you take it as pulmonary hypertension. What are the maternal risks? In pregnancy, pulmonary hypertension, the pressure will increase in the pulmonary vasculature. That is due to because of the heart fluid overload to the right ventricle. As I previously described, volume will increase, right? Right, so that venous return will increase. As a result, there will be more pressure on the pulmonary vasculature, so that pulmonary hypertension can become severe in pregnancy. So because of that, pulmonary hypertension is associated with a very high maternal mortality rate. It's about 30 to 50%. Some series show about 17 to 33%. So depending on various papers, you will find these figures, but usually generally considered as 30 to 50% maternal mortality rate with pulmonary hypertension. Usually the maternal death occurs during the third trimester and the first month of postpartum period. This may occur due to pulmonary hypertensive crisis, or pulmonary thrombosis, or refractory heart failure, this maternal death. How do you manage these patients? First, you have to offer termination of pregnancy because it is contraindicated. If the patient chooses to continue the pregnancy, then you need thorough counseling. You have to tell the patient and the husband or the partner, you have to involve with this in this discussion. You have to say that there is a high risk of maternal death, and the patient have to be compliant, very, very compliant if she continues to continue the pregnancy, and there is a risk of heart failure during this pregnancy, and there is a possibility of delivering a preterm baby, right? Long-term hospital stay, and she will have to be managed in a tertiary care hospital, and sometimes she can end up with severe morbidity. So all these things have to be discussed with the patient before she decides that she is going to continue the pregnancy. And especially you have to maintain a good volume of hemorrhage, and dehydration can increase the complications and hypoxia. sometimes they will need anticoagulation, especially when they have a risk of pulmonary artery thrombosis. If there is signs of heart failure, when the pulmonary arterial hypertension is associated with connective tissue disorders, these patients will need anticoagulation. So types may be either oral anticoagulants or low molecular weight heparins or unfractionated heparins. Any of these you can select depending on the circumstance. So you know how to monitor patients who are on anticoagulation, right? Mode of delivery of these patients, pulmonary hypertension, it has to be a planned delivery, of course. Vaginal, well, you can go for vaginal delivery, but it is cesarean section is more preferred method of delivery, because vaginal delivery you will have to wait until she goes into labor, right? You will have, if you're inducing, it might take time. So rather than waiting for vaginal delivery, it's better to go for elective cesarean section and deliver. Patients with Eisenmenger syndrome. What is Eisenmenger? That is when you have a shunt, when the shunt is reversed, and then it will become Eisenmengers, right? So when the shunt reverses, what happens is less oxygenated blood will mix with the left side of the heart, so that they will have cyanosis. This is always associated with pulmonary hypertension. Systemic vasodilatation increases the right to left shunt and decreases pulmonary flow, leading to increased cyanosis and eventually to a low output state. That's why in pregnancy this condition is can get worse, because in pregnancy what happens is there will be systemic vasodilatation due to the effects of the hormones, especially progesterone hormone. So it is associated with a high rate of maternal mortality. It amounts to 20 to 50%. There's a major risk of thromboembolism, and there is polycythemia, and that will lead into formation of thrombi. Cyanosis poses a significant risk to the fetus. So the live birth rate is very, very low. It may be even less than 12% if you come across a patient with Eisenmenger's, especially if the oxygen saturation is less than 85%. Most of these patients will have a very low oxygen saturation, Eisenmenger's patient. How do you manage? Risk should be discussed with the patient. Termination has to be offered, right? The patient wishes to continue the pregnancy, this has to be managed in a specialist unit, especially tertiary care units where all the facilities and the specialties are available. Patient should be on bed rest throughout the pregnancy. Anticoagulant therapy you will have to administer, but there's a risk of hemoptysis and thrombocytopenia with the anticoagulation. Mode of delivery is planned cesarean section, and regional anesthesia is preferred rather than general anesthesia. Cyanotic heart disease without pulmonary hypertension. What are these conditions? Tetralogy of Fallot's, hypoplastic left heart, severe coarctation of aorta, transposition of great arteries. These are the cyanotic heart diseases which usually don't have pulmonary hypertension. Usually maternal complications are about 30% in cyanotic pregnant patients. What are these complications? They can go into heart failure, pulmonary or systemic thrombosis, supraventricular arrhythmias, infective endocarditis. Right, about 30% of these mothers can have these complications. If the resting oxygen saturation is 85 or less, pregnancy is contraindicated. So you have to offer termination to these patients. If the saturation is between 85 to 90%, again you have to, if they have not become pregnant, to see the suitability of getting pregnant, you have to measure their oxygen saturation during exercise. If the saturation decreases very early with the exercise test, then there is a poor prognosis, so that you have to tell them that the pregnancy can be contraindicated in these patients. The fetal and maternal outcome depends on the oxygen saturation. As I said, if the oxygen saturation is more than 80%, the outcome is better. Management, again, bed rest. They will need frequent oxygen, anticoagulation, anti-embolic measures, stockings, right? And they will have to be reviewed by the hematologist frequently. Delivery has to be planned, early admission, and you have to have a planned delivery. Normal delivery is preferred, but delivery has to be planned with a multidisciplinary approach. When you talk about the low and moderate risk of maternal cardiovascular conditions, in patients who have undergone previous successful surgical repair without mechanical heart valve implantation, pregnancy is often well tolerated. If exercise tolerance is good, ventricular function is normal, functional status is good, the outcome is usually good. So if they have undergone previous successful surgical repair without mechanical heart replacement, heart valve replacement, if the exercise tolerance is good, ventricular function is normal, functional status is good, usually you can have a good outcome. Atrial septal defects. What are the maternal risks? Usually the pregnancy is well tolerated. The only contraindication is the presence of pulmonary arterial hypertension or Eisenmenger syndrome, when the shunt has reversed. But if the shunt hasn't reversed, the ASD is small, usually they tolerate the pregnancy very well. They can go through the pregnancy like a normal person, normal mother. There can be thromboembolic events, but that is very, very rare in ASDs. If the she has had hemodynamic changes, say there is shunt reversal or it is about to reverse, then you have to delay the pregnancy until she undergoes surgical closure. What are the risks to the fetus? Unrepaired ASD, there's a risk of pregnancy-induced hypertension and IUGR. If the ASD is repaired, this risk has not been seen. There's a risk of supraventricular tachycardias, especially when it is unrepaired. You know what happens is right heart and the left atrium will become more hypertrophic, right? And so that there is a possibility of supraventricular tachycardias and arrhythmias. There is a risk of increased congenital heart disease. This, of course, I have discussed earlier. Normal vaginal delivery in most of the cases, right? Most of the cases are uncomplicated, so that they can go into normal delivery. You don't have to induce. You can wait until they go into spontaneous onset of labor. If you need, for any operatic reason, you can induce. You can use most of the contraceptive methods in ASD, right? Ventricular septal defects. What are the maternal risks? If it's a small perimembranous VSD without left heart dilatation, they have a low risk of complications during pregnancy, right? So if it's a small membranous lesion, very low risk during pregnancy. If there's a large VSD, there's a possibility of pulmonary arterial hypertension and pulmonary hypertension, so that it may be contraindicated for pregnancy. So these patients, it's advisable to undergo correction before the pregnancy. And during antenatal period, she will have to undergo several 2D echoes to see the progression of the shunt, and if she's developing pulmonary hypertension, right, then you can decide the timing of delivery and what sort of intervention she needs. So all this can be decided by 2D echoes. During labor, they will probably need endocarditis prophylaxis, especially if they undergo cesarean section. If cardiac function is good, then they can undergo normal delivery. And postnatal period, you have to monitor the fluid balance very well. If you have a high fluid loss, fluid overload, can go into heart failure. So that sometimes you might need to use diuretics during the postnatal period. There is no restriction for contraceptives. Mitral stenosis is associated with most of the morbidity and mortality of rheumatic heart disease in pregnancy. So most of the rheumatic patients come with mitral stenosis, right? They will have diastolic murmur. So you should not miss a diastolic murmur in a pregnant woman. Always you have to auscultate pregnant women when they're coming for the booking visit, second trimester and third trimester. All these trimesters you have to auscultate mothers to see if there are any murmurs. what happens in mitral stenosis is that there is left atrial outflow obstruction and the cardiac output will be fixed. And the left atrial and pulmonary vascular pressure increases because there is a backflow. You know, because of the stenosed valve, you can deliver only very small amount of fluid, volume in the left ventricle, so that there will be retention of more blood in the left atrium, and that will be transmitted back to the pulmonary vessels, so that it causes pulmonary hypertension. So that will lead into secondary pulmonary hypertension. And same time, left atrium become dilated, and then it can cause atrial fibrillation and supraventricular tachycardia. In pregnancy, increased intravascular volume can further elevate pressure and lead to pulmonary edema and arrhythmias. So that's why in pregnancy they get pulmonary edema, because of the elevated pressures and increased blood volumes. When the stenosis is small, mild, usually the pregnancy is tolerated well. But severity of the stenosis is severe. It's very severe stenosis that might not tolerate the pregnancy well. By using 2D echo and color Doppler, you can assess the size of the lesion and how far it is stenosed, right? And whether the cardiac chambers are dilated. So 2D echo is very useful in this condition. Severe stenosis is defined by when the valve area is less than 1 square centimeters. So in this situation, it is called tight mitral stenosis, and then patient, if she is pregnant, and when the pregnancy advances, she can go into failure. So these patients will need intervention sometimes during pregnancy. So they can undergo percutaneous transmitral commissurotomy after 20 weeks, especially when the patient is at functional class of 3 or 4. Then they will have to undergo this procedure. Prenatally, you have to monitor weight gain, signs of heart failure. They will need physical rest. Sometimes they will need beta blockers and digoxin to slow the heart. You have to slow the heart rate, because if there is tachycardia, what happens is there will be less time for the left ventricle to fill, because through the valve only very small limited amount of blood will be delivered. When the heart rate is increased, there will be short diastole, so that the amount filled into the left ventricle is less, so that they can go into heart failure. So it's better to slow the heart rate, so you can give beta blockers. They can undergo vaginal delivery if there is the functional class is between 1 to 2. They can undergo vaginal delivery. If there is pulmonary hypertension or NYHA class 3 or 4, then you have to deliver by cesarean section. Epidural anesthesia you can use, it is safe, and if she goes into labor, that is the best way to give the analgesia, and same time you can convert it if to when you are doing a cesarean section, again it is useful. As I said earlier, second stage has to be shortened by forceps or vacuum delivery. Ergometrin should be avoided in postnatal period after delivery, immediate postnatal period, and you can use misoprostol or carboprost in case of postpartum hemorrhage, but that has to be used with caution because that can affect pulmonary arterial pressures, can increase the pulmonary arterial pressure. Sometimes you can use it. And in the postnatal period, you may have to use diuretics to reduce the fluid load to the heart, because if the fluid load increases, the patient can go into heart failure. Contraceptives, combined oral contraceptives can be used in mild MS. If you use intrauterine copper device, there is a risk of bacterial endocarditis. But if you use Mirena or LNG IUS, the risk of bacterial endocarditis is less. So, and it is effective, so you can use Mirena instead of copper device. Mitral and aortic regurgitation. Most of the time these are rheumatic in origin or congenital. Sometimes they may be degenerative in course. Usually regurgitation is very well tolerated in pregnancy. Sometimes with severe regurgitation with LV dysfunction or acute regurgitation may be poorly tolerated in pregnancy. If it's a chronic regurgitation, mild regurgitation, pregnancy is almost like a normal pregnancy. But when there is LV dysfunction, like left ventricular dysfunction, or if there is acute regurgitation, then the outcome will be poor. Sometimes you can have atrial fibrillation and arrhythmias due to mitral regurgitation, and can lead into congestive cardiac failure. So pre-pregnancy you have to assess the degree of the regurgitation by 2D echo. Sometimes you will have to do exercise testing and assess the functional class. If the functional class is low, they can have pregnancy, they can go in undergo pregnancy. Otherwise they will have to undergo repair. In antenatal period, they also will have to undergo serial echocardiography to see the progress of the disease. They need digoxin or diuretics depending on the circumstance. Activity should be reduced in these patients. Again, the volume status has to be monitored in labor and postnatal period, like in any other cardiac condition. And monitoring has to be done to see if there is any atrial fibrillation. There is a possibility of atrial fibrillation, right? Regional anesthesia can be used. Especially combined oral contraceptive has to be avoided as a method of contraception. Aortic stenosis. It is mainly bicuspid aortic valve is the cause of aortic stenosis. This can be asymptomatic, even severe. It can be asymptomatic. The symptoms might first appear in pregnancy. That is the danger. They may not be symptomatic before becoming pregnant, pre-pregnant, but the first time the symptoms may appear in pregnancy. Before becoming pregnant, you have to measure the valve diameter, right? Pregnancy will be tolerated in cases like mild to moderate aortic stenosis who are asymptomatic. Severe atrial stenosis, when they are asymptomatic and blood pressure response to exercise is normal, again they can tolerate the pregnancy well. So when there is severe aortic stenosis, you have to do exercise test and see whether the blood pressure response is normal. If it is normal, generally they will tolerate the pregnancy well. What are the maternal and fetal risks? The normal aortic valve area is 3 to 4 centimeters, 4 square centimeters. In mild to moderate congenital stenosis, the aortic valve area will be more than 1 centimeter. This is relatively well tolerated in pregnancy. And in these cases, the maternal deaths are very rare. They can have preterm delivery, low birth weight as fetal complications. Antenatally, physical activity should be limited. They will need closer follow-up, and you have to look for signs of congestive cardiac failure. They might need beta blockers, diuretics, digoxin if they become symptomatic. If they become severely symptomatic, then you will have to perform percutaneous balloon valvuloplasty. Then they will immediately relieve their symptoms. If the AS is severe symptomatic, you have to perform elective cesarean section. Otherwise, they can undergo normal delivery. Postnatal management is almost the same as any other so as the time is limited, I might not touch on those. The prosthetic valves, they have a high risk of thrombosis. They will need anticoagulation during the pregnancy, and warfarin is the most preferred drug in prosthetic valves. But in pregnancy, during the first trimester, you will have to convert it into low molecular weight heparin, and after 12 weeks, you can put them back onto warfarin, and at the time of delivery, again you will have to change it to low molecular weight heparin, right? And if you are using more warfarin, INR has to be maintained from 2.5 to 3.5 levels. So in labor, you will have to, of course, withhold anticoagulation at least 12 hours before the labor. And after about 4 hours, after 4 hours of delivery, you can start the anticoagulation. So because of this, I think it's better to deliver them by electrocesarean section, because if you wait until they go into labor, you don't know how long it will take for the labor to occur, and you can't keep them longer without anticoagulation, and that will damage the prosthetic valve. So most of the time these patients will have electrocesarean section. Usually combined oral contraceptives and hormonal methods are avoided in these patients, but still Mirena is a good option for these patients as a contraceptive method. Heart disease in pregnancy, the list goes on. As I said, it's very hard to complete by one lecture. You need a few lectures to cover the whole topics. If you take the coronary artery disease, in summary, if patients come with chest pain, you will have to always do ECG and troponins. Coronary angioplasty is the preferred reperfusion therapy for STEMI during pregnancy. The ST elevation MI, coronary angioplasty has to be performed during pregnancy, irrespective of the pregnancy, right? Non-ST elevation ACS, you can conservatively manage. If there is non-ST elevation with risk criteria, you can invasively manage this patient. That means either you will have to do PCA or they will have to undergo CABG, right? That is, if there is ST elevation, non-ST elevation MI with risk category, risk criteria. Same way, if there is ST elevation ACS with risk criteria, again you will have to manage invasively, that is PCA or CABG. Cardiomyopathy is is a cardiomyopathy confined to pregnancy. This is ventricular dysfunction between late pregnancy and the first 5 months postpartum period. What happens is the ejection fraction goes down less than 45%. Usually there is no left ventricular dilatation. That is the diagnostic criteria is by exclusion. And then if there is no left ventricular dilatation, where there is ejection fraction less than 45% in pregnancy, in late pregnancy, this is peripartum cardiomyopathy. Incidence is about 1 into 300 to 1 into 4,000 pregnancies. There are a lot of predisposing factors: multiplarity, multiple pregnancies, family history, ethnicity, smoking, diabetes, hypertension, preeclampsia, malnutrition, advanced maternal age or teenage pregnancy, prolonged use of beta agonists. There are a lot of risk factors for peripartum cardiomyopathy. Etiology is of course very well not known, but is very uncertain. They think it may be due to infection or autoimmune disease, or it may be due to inflammation, and it can present as acute failure or complex arrhythmias or sudden cardiac arrest. management, urgent delivery has to be performed if there is cardiac failure. If it is uncomplicated, normal vaginal delivery can be considered. Say left ventricular failure is minimal, then you can consider normal vaginal delivery. Anticoagulation will be needed. Recovery might take up to about 6 months. Sometimes you will have residual effects as well. It can recur in the subsequent pregnancies up to about 30 to 50%. That is the disadvantage. So that concludes my lecture on the heart disease in pregnancy. As I said, you can't confine this conditions to one lecture, and the list goes on and on. And I thought of taking only few conditions, maybe related to the pregnancy, maybe related to our day-to-day practice, and hope you had got some information about this. And yeah, so that's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jagat Premadasa, for a very comprehensive lecture on heart disease, cardiac diseases in pregnancy, and for your the contribution or your commitment in the middle of your busy schedule. I know how the teaching hospital in Anuradhapura is busy. So now I think Dr. Premadasa will be very much happy to answer any question.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sorry because during the lecture there were a lot of disconnection. I think maybe due to the weather there was a bit of
Okay. Yeah, you can ask any question, or you can type it in the chat box. I saw one question. I'm not sure whether you answered. It was one student asked whether T inversion in lead 3, whether it's normal.
Yeah, it's taken as normal. Actually, 1 to 3 is usually generally taken as normal in pregnancy. There are a lot of cardiac ECG changes which are taken as normal. Sometimes even up to lead 5 in T inversion can be normal in pregnancy. So up to 1 to 3, it's normal T inversion.
Okay. Any more questions? Please ask questions. You must have a lot of questions, because this entity you can come across as a long case, as well as in your theory essays and MCQs and SBAs. Any question?
I think they must be fed up of listening for nearly 2 hours.
I think lecture is comprehensive. So yeah, you covered all the aspects: treatment, acquired heart disease, congenital heart disease, ischemic heart diseases.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, then shall we wind up the session? We'll call it a day.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. On behalf of PEMSA and on behalf of your batchmate, Prof. Tushar.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank
Good
you.
night. Good night.
Good night.